They say time erodes memory, but on this land memory erodes time. Every pebble on this road has been here longer than the HOA, longer than Karen, longer than asphalt itself. My name is Jack Monroe, and the lake. That lake is my blood, my past, my family. I was born on this land in 1968. The very house I live in now, it was built by my grandfather, John Mitchell Monroe, in 1947, 3 years after he returned from the war. Grandpa was a stubborn man, not cruel, but iron-willed, the kind of man who read every word of every contract before he signed it, who believed land meant legacy, not leverage. And when he bought this land, 70 acres wrapping around a lake so still it looked painted in oil, he knew one thing: the water had to remain his. So he bought it, all of it, not just the surface, the rights. Riparian rights, mineral rights, dam control rights, flowage control, the full stack, and he didn't trust counties, didn't trust states either. So he filed everything: copies of deeds, notarized water agreements, court validations in triplicate. One set for the county office, one for a private bank vault in Red Falls, and one in a rusted green filing cabinet in the back of our attic. That cabinet still smells like oilcloth and mothballs, but it holds the truth, including a blueprint of the flood valve system beneath the East Bank, the dam, built in 1938, reinforced in 45, last activated in 1987 during a seasonal flood. I was there when we shut it down. I was just a boy, holding a flashlight while Grandpa turned the wheel. He told me then, one day, someone's gonna think they own what's under your feet, but they don't. We do. Don't ever let them forget that. I didn't. And I never planned to until Karen Delaney and her army of smug chuckers rolled into my life. It all started with a sound I hadn't heard in decades: bulldozers, 7:12 a.m. Monday, June 6th. I was drinking coffee on the porch, boots still muddy from tending to the west pasture. My dog, Ranger, was pacing, ears twitching. That's when I saw them, big yellow machines pushing up dust like storms. 4 men in bright orange vests, one of them already halfway across the bridge. My bridge, hey! I shouted, but the engines roared louder. I grabbed my hat and ran. They didn't stop. In front of them stood a woman in heels, holding a clipboard like it was a judge's gavel. Karen Delaney, president of the Lakes at Redding Estates HOA, and standing next to her a county officer, the kind they always send when paperwork's confusing but someone's rich enough to pretend they own what they don't. "This is unauthorized," I yelled. Karen looked at me like I was an uninvited animal at her private wedding. "The structure violates code. It's unsightly. It's a hazard. It's been here for 70 years, I snapped. "That doesn't make it legal." And with that, she gave the nod. The machine backed up. Crack thunk, the first timber gave way. I watched my grandfather's work collapse under steel teeth. And in that moment, something in me fractured. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, like the surface of a lake right before the storm rolls in. The night after the bridge was destroyed, I barely slept. I kept hearing it: splinters cracking, the sound of steel shearing wood, the echo of my grandfather's legacy being crushed in front of men with clipboards and zero soul. Ranger lay by the door, ears perked. Every time a branch snapped outside, he growled low. My house was quiet, too quiet, but I couldn't rest. I sat in my grandfather's old leather chair, the one with the cracked armrests and permanent imprint of a man who spent more time thinking than speaking. I opened the old green filing cabinet at 2:43 a.m. Inside, deed papers, handwritten letters, 3 maps from 1946 showing lake boundaries, and a tiny envelope marked emergency in Grandpa's handwriting. Inside was a note: "If they take it by force, you take it back by flow," and taped to it a second damn key. By morning, I decided to call the sheriff. Deputy Mark Holland was a straight shooter, grew up in these parts, hunted in my woods as a teen. Now wore the badge with the kind of weariness you earn from babysitting more Karens than criminals. "Let me guess," he said when I explained. "Karen Delaney, that's her. This is the 3rd time this month she's caused a land dispute. Last week she reported an 82-year-old man for operating a non-approved scarecrow." I blinked. "Is that even a thing?" "Wasn't until she made it one. Don't worry, Jack, I'll file it, but you should know, they got lawyers now. That was when I learned the HOA had partnered with a firm called Thatcher and White. Real estate vultures, big city lawyers with slick hair and the moral spine of wet spaghetti. The next day I received an email. It wasn't from Karen, it was from their attorney. Subject: notice of encroachment violations they accused me of, allowing uncontrolled wildlife. On HOA land, they meant ducks violating view corridor ordinances by planting trees which were here since 1970, operating an unregistered private dock structure, built in 1952, and they demanded I attend a mandatory compliance meeting with the HOA council. I laughed so hard I choked on my tea. "Ranger," I said, patting my dog's head, "they think I'll bow." But then I remembered something Grandpa once told me. Power's not in your hands until they try to take it from you. So I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I opened the vault in the basement. Inside was every paper my family ever kept, the original land patent from 1889, water rights granted in perpetuity notarized, signed by the old governor himself. And more than that, photos, the bridge being built, my grandfather beside the first timber, me as a boy, fishing on its edge. I took them all, placed them in a binder, and then I got in my truck and drove to the county courthouse. 30 minutes later, the clerk had confirmed my land was never part of the subdivision. My water rights were exclusive and predate zoning laws. The dam valve was legally mine. When I walked out, I looked across the street. There was Karen standing on the HOA lawn with 2 board members and a surveyor, pointing toward my land like she already owned it. I gave her a slow nod, the kind of nod that says, "I know something you don't." She didn't wave back. She just turned, grabbed her phone, and started barking orders again. That evening, I returned home to find 3 HOA inspectors standing near my dock, snapping pictures. "You're trespassing," I said. "This is for record keeping," one of them replied. "Your records don't mean anything on this land. The HOA grants us temporary enforcement powers." That's when I raised my camera and took their photo. "Smile," I said. "You'll be in the sheriff's report." They left in a hurry, but I knew then they weren't just posturing. They were testing me, and tests have consequences. The sun rose blood. Red the morning after the dam confrontation. Jack Monroe stood at the edge of his property, boots in the cold dew, eyes fixed on the scar where the old bridge used to be. The destruction still looked unreal, like someone had ripped a page from his family history book and tossed it into the fire. But the real war hadn't even started yet. Back in her fancy HOA office, Karen Rutherford was on a mission. The bridge had just been the first blow. She sipped overpriced coffee from her Queen of Order mug and flipped through papers like they were weapons. She'd called an emergency HOA board meeting. No one dared miss it, not when Karen was mad. "I want full compliance inspections of every single property along Lake Halloway," she snapped to the board. "Especially that stubborn fossil, Jack Monroe." Some nodded, others avoided her gaze. The HOA treasurer, Glenn, a frail man with watery eyes, tried to mumble something about budget approvals. Karen's heel clicked on the tile floor as she stood, looming. Do it or resign, that was all it took. The next morning, a swarm of inspectors showed up at Jack's gate. They weren't city workers, they were HOA volunteers, clipboard warriors in matching polo shirts. Jack watched them from the porch, arms crossed, fury simmering under his skin. "Violation," one muttered, pointing at a rusty weather vane. "Violation," another said, crouching beside a small patch of wildflowers. "Fire hazard," one woman whispered as she noted Jack's stacked firewood. Jack chuckled bitterly. This land was fine for 80 years. Now it's a hazard because Karen says so. They didn't answer, just snapped photos, shook their heads, and posted bright orange HOA citations across his property. Jack pulled one down and stared at the ridiculous list: unregistered livestock pen, non-standard fencing, unapproved flora encroachment. His dog growled. Jack didn't, yet back in the neighborhood the tide was beginning to shift. Not everyone hated Jack. Some missed the old bridge. Others were tired of Karen's reign. Neighbors whispered. Cars slowed past his property but didn't stop. A few left anonymous notes in his mailbox. "Sorry about your bridge. We didn't vote for this. Karen's gone too far this time." Still, none spoke publicly. Karen had eyes everywhere. She was the queen of this artificial castle, and no one wanted to be next. That night, the sabotage started. It began with someone cutting a hole in Jack's pasture fence. His goats wandered loose onto the old trail by the lake. He spent 3 hours chasing them with a flashlight and a half-charged radio. Then came the sugar in the fuel tank. Jack's old Ford wouldn't start. He opened the hood, took one whiff, and sighed. The scent of destruction, sweet and sharp, but the real gut punch came the next day. His grandfather's old smokehouse, the same one they'd built together in 1974, was scorched. Not fully burned, but someone had clearly tried. Charred timber, blackened corner, scorched ground. Jack didn't call the sheriff. He didn't need a report. He needed a plan. He sat on the porch that evening, staring at the lake. The water shimmered in the sunset like it was mocking him. It used to bring peace. Now it only brought memories. He closed his eyes and remembered his grandfather's voice. "This land fights back, Jack. It always has. You just have to let it." Jack stood. The memory had become a message. Back in HOA HQ, Karen sipped her wine and watched ring cam footage of Jack's farm. She rewound it, zoomed in. She smiled when she saw the bridge gone. She chuckled when she spotted the inspectors taping violations. But she didn't know Jack had installed a new set of trail cams, not ring, not cloud, connected, just old school motion cameras, hidden in trees, pointed at the edges of his land. She didn't know he had photos, footage, license plates. And she sure as hell didn't know that Jack had begun writing his own notes, preparing to send legal cease and desist letters to every HOA board member, citing illegal inspections, trespassing, and property damage. In the local bar down the road, the town began to talk. Not just whispers now, actual talk. "She went too far with that bridge. Jack's a good man, always was. Used to fish off that thing with my dad." Karen's ears burned even in her own house. She tried to double down, more inspections, more fines. She even ordered the HOA landscapers to trim back the edge of Jack's wild grove, the one that crossed slightly into HOA easement land. Bad move. Jack was ready now. He didn't speak. He documented. He didn't yell. He prepared. And when he mailed certified letters with legal signatures citing historic easement rights and family land protections dating back to 1912, the HOA board began to feel the pressure. Even Glenn, the treasurer, started avoiding her calls. Late one night, Jack stood at the dam, lantern in hand, water roaring, heart pounding. His grandfather's old dam manual sat open beside him. The bolts, the locks, the thresholds, it was all there, and Jack knew how to use it. Not yet, but soon. The sun had barely crested over the treetops when Jack woke to the low hum of machinery echoing across his valley. He sat up, the familiar sounds of nature replaced by something colder, mechanical. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he stepped outside and saw a bulldozer rolling down the path that led to the eastern fence line, his fence line. He didn't need binoculars to know who was behind it. Even from this distance, he could see Karen's unmistakable posture, arms folded, head tilted upward like she ruled the earth. The bulldozer came to a halt just 10 feet from the stone pillar that marked the old property line, a line that had stood for over 70 years. Karen motioned toward the worker, who hesitated, then started revving the engine again. Jack stepped back inside, grabbed his phone, and hit record. He walked calmly toward the edge of his land, stopping short of the property marker. "You're trespassing," he called out over the roar. Karen turned slowly, face smug. "We're making improvements for the good of the community. This wall is an eyesore, and it violates HOA aesthetic standards. That wall predates your entire development," Jack replied, not raising his voice. "It's on private land, and I have the deed to prove it." She gestured to her clipboard, pretending to shuffle papers. "According to our maps, this is common space. If you have an issue, take it to the board." Jack gritted his teeth. He had already taken things to the board twice, and both times his complaints were mysteriously omitted from the meeting minutes. Later that evening, Jack reviewed the footage, adding it to his growing library. He wasn't ready to go public, not yet, but each act of harassment added weight to the case he was building, a case not just against Karen, but against an entire system of backdoor power, manipulation, and unchecked HOA greed. Over the next few days, more incidents followed. A small grove of century, old junipers that lined the southern edge of the lake. cut down and left in a heap, labeled as a fire hazard. A noise complaint. Filed by the HOA when Jack's nephew visited and played bluegrass music on the porch for 15 minutes. And then came the false citations, one after another, each one more absurd than the last, failing to mow community, adjacent, grass, not having reflective tape on his mailbox post, storing unapproved equipment near the barn. Jack didn't need to ask what was next. The real target wasn't the wall, or the music, or even the land. It was him. Word started to spread among the long-timers in the neighborhood. The Jeffersons, who'd lived there for 20 years, told Jack that Karen was pushing for emergency amendments to HOA bylaws, ones that would give the board power to acquire and rezone common border areas. For infrastructure development, Jack knew what that meant. They were coming for his lake. One morning, a man named Curtis, a retired teacher who lived 3 lots over, stopped Jack on the road. He wore a tired flannel and carried a thermos of bitter coffee. "I was on the board," he said softly, glancing behind to make sure no one was listening. "Karen's not just doing this on her own. She's got backing, developers mostly, the lake resort property they want to expand, but your dam controls the whole water level. They need access or else their whole Phase 3 goes bust." Jack stared at him. "They've been trying to find legal pathways around your rights. Can't touch the dam itself, but if they prove you're damaging community development or creating environmental risks, they can challenge it in court. It'll be long, messy, expensive." Jack nodded slowly. "Thanks for telling me." Curtis gave a grim smile. "You didn't hear it from me." That night, Jack pulled out a thick folder from the back of his file cabinet. Yellowed papers, hand-written surveys, water rights documents dated back to the 1940s. His grandfather had been meticulous. Every transaction, every permit, every agreement with the county and the state, all carefully recorded, and it was all still valid. They had underestimated him. They thought he was just another recluse with a rundown farm and a lake. But this land had memory, and Jack had proof. When he showed up at the next HOA meeting, the board members went silent. Karen's smile faltered the moment she saw the stack of legal documents under Jack's arm. "I'm here to submit formal notice," Jack said, placing a certified envelope on the table. "Any further action against my land will be considered harassment. You're in violation of state statutes regarding water regulation boundaries and historic land preservation." Karen tried to recover. "You can't just walk in here and—" Jack held up a printed page. "This is a map from the State Water Authority. It shows the original dam boundaries. Your resort lies within flood overflow range. You're in violation of 3 separate zoning clauses." The room fell quiet. One of the board members cleared his throat. "We didn't know you knew," Jack said coldly. "You just didn't care." The meeting ended early. Karen stormed out, but the war wasn't over. Over the following weeks, HOA operatives shifted tactics. No more bulldozers or public aggression. Now it was shadows. Anonymous complaints to county inspectors, vandalism at the far edge of Jack's property, even poisoned trees near the stream, meant to look like disease. But Jack knew. He kept watch. He installed hidden trail cameras, marked fence disturbances, even tracked tire treads near the dam road. His land, once quiet and forgotten, had become a battlefield. And through it all, he remembered something his grandfather once said: "Land don't fight back unless the hands who work it are willing." So Jack worked. He cleared the trails, reinforced the dam stonework, reseeded the wildflowers along the fence line. Not just for himself, but for the land, and the land remembered. Jack stood on the dock, staring at the muddy remnants where the bridge once stood. The sun had long since dipped behind the hills, but he hadn't moved. In his mind, he could still hear the thunder of the bulldozer, feel the vibration under his boots as his grandfather's legacy was turned to rubble. The roar of the machine was replaced now by the unsettling silence of a lake that no longer connected just 2 broken banks, as divided as the community itself. At sunrise, Jack made his way into town to the courthouse. He wasn't a lawyer, but he didn't have to be. What he held in his leather folder was bigger than any legal argument the HOA could throw at him. Century-old documents, blueprints, deeds, and a dam control agreement signed and sealed by the original landowners before the lake was even part of the subdivision. His great-grandfather's name was etched on those papers in the flowing ink of a different time. And now they were about to make a comeback. The clerk at the county recorder's office looked confused. "These are really old. You sure this is relevant?" Jack leaned over the counter. "You'll want to scan every word. The HOA didn't build this lake. My family did, and I have the flow rights to prove it." Back at the HOA clubhouse, Karen was stirring up her usual storm. She had filed 3 noise complaints against Jack that week alone. She claimed his farm equipment was aggressively mechanical. The board sat around their mahogany table nodding, some out of fear, others out of sheer habit. Only one member, a newly elected retired schoolteacher named Linda, dared to question her authority. "We might be overreaching," Linda offered timidly. "He hasn't broken any actual rules." Karen's eyes snapped to her. "He insulted this community with that old bridge. It was dangerous, ugly, and an eyesore. I did what needed to be done." Linda's hands folded quietly in her lap. She didn't argue, but Jack had made an impression, and Linda wasn't the only one. That evening, someone left a note on Jack's porch. No name, just carefully printed words. "Karen forged signatures at last year's vote. She thinks you won't dig. You should." Jack knew it was time to fight back with more than just history. It was time to uncover everything. With a friend from his firefighting days, a guy named Marcus who now worked in IT security, Jack launched a full investigation. They pulled public records, scanned HOA filings, and tracked down former residents who had quietly left the community. Stories emerged: a man fined for letting his daughter paint her mailbox, a woman evicted after refusing to cut down a 100-year-old oak tree on her lot. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance, it was a quiet empire of fear. Jack compiled it all in a growing binder: photos, signed statements, time-stamped copies of HOA minutes. Each page made the case clearer. Karen had turned the HOA into her personal kingdom, weaponizing the bylaws against anyone who didn't bow. But Jack wasn't just fighting with paper. He began rebuilding. Not the bridge, not yet, but the spirit of the neighborhood. He started organizing backyard barbecues. People came cautiously at first, then more. By week's end, a dozen families showed up with kids and folding chairs. Laughter echoed down the lakefront for the first time in months. Karen saw it all from her balcony. That's when the real sabotage began. First, Jack's fence was cut. He fixed it. Then the wires in his old tractor were yanked out and scattered across the field. He installed cameras. When someone poured salt into his vegetable beds, he didn't flinch. Instead, he posted the footage online. The clip went viral in town. The HOA board tried to spin it, but the public had seen enough. Local news even aired a segment titled "HOA or Harassment." A reporter stood next to Jack by the dam, holding one of the old documents. "I didn't want to be the guy who drained a lake," Jack told her. "But sometimes, when someone floods your life with hate, you have to turn the valve the other way." Karen panicked. She held an emergency board meeting, demanding everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement: no more leaks, no more questions. But the cracks had already split deep. Even her most loyal followers were starting to question who the real villain was. Jack, meanwhile, had started to prep the dam. He didn't touch the wheel, not yet. But he cleaned it, lubricated the joints, repainted the rusted bolts. The town whispered, and at night he stood by the water watching its calm surface. The reflection of stars shimmered, waiting for what came next. The day began with an unnatural stillness. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if the land itself knew what was about to unfold. Jack stood at the edge of the dam, staring down at the thick, reinforced metal valve gate. His boots pressed into the wet gravel, the keys to the control box cold in his hand. He wasn't trembling. There was no fear, just purpose. For the first time in months, Jack felt completely aligned with the land, with his legacy. No matter what came next, lawsuits, media coverage, arrests, this was the moment the land had waited for, the moment he had waited for. He slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying clunk. The panel lit up, dim green lights blinking in sequence. Jack moved his hand toward the lever. He paused, taking one long breath, looking out over the artificial lake stretching like a mirror to the resort at the other end. Beyond the calm surface sat luxury cabins, rental docks, paddle boats, and hundreds of feet of fake imported sand. Expensive, curated peace, all built on arrogance. Click, the lever moved slowly. A rumble echoed beneath his feet as ancient gears awakened. The water began to swirl, first as a soft whirlpool, then growing in strength. In seconds, a deep vortex formed at the base of the dam, and the steady hiss of water releasing began. Within minutes, the level of the lake dropped several inches. At the resort, it took longer for anyone to notice, but then came the shouting. Tourists pulled out phones. Staff panicked, running down to the docks, shouting into walkie-talkies. The resort manager called emergency services, thinking there had been a breach. Karen, meanwhile, had been preparing for a victory interview. A local blogger had agreed to feature her story, how she protected the neighborhood from a decaying, dangerous bridge and forced a problematic old man to sell. She wore a red pantsuit and a smug expression, until her phone lit up with texts, panicked ones, lake level dropping. What the hell's going on? Jack's draining the whole thing? She didn't believe it. Not at first. She thought it was a scare tactic. But then came the live streams. The camera angles showing the shoreline receding, boats grounding themselves on mud, and panicked resort guests shouting at staff. She raced to the HOA office, flipping through the emergency binder. There had to be something, some ordinance, some permit, anything that gave them power, but she found nothing. Jack hadn't just been smart, he'd been thorough. Everything he did was legal. Every right, every document, every old law from 1947 had been checked and double-checked. By midday, the lake was down 6 feet. Whole docks sat on bare dirt. Jet skis lay on their sides, abandoned in puddles. The once beautiful shoreline now looked like a drained swimming pool, muddy, cracked, and embarrassing, and Jack had gone home. After initiating the valve, he made himself a sandwich, poured a glass of cold sweet tea, and sat on his porch. From his rocking chair, he had a perfect view of the dying lake and the chaos erupting at the resort. Reporters showed up around 3 p.m. Helicopters hovered low over the water, filming the once luxury destination now reduced to a muddy basin. The resort owner, a sleek-haired man named Bryce, stood red-faced at the dock, yelling into phones and swearing lawsuits. Karen tried to intervene, but Bryce snapped back. "You told me he was senile. You said he didn't have water rights anymore. You said this was your lake, but it wasn't. The old property deeds said otherwise. Jack's grandfather had built the dam, regulated the water flow, and retained every inch of water right down to the evaporation clauses." Karen hadn't just lost a PR war, she'd handed Jack legal leverage on a silver platter. The next day, headlines exploded. Resort dry as dust. HOA power play backfires. Water war. Local man drains lake after bridge demolished. Jack vs. Karen, who really owns the lake. But Jack didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything Karen could spin. Photos of him sipping tea on his porch, watching the lake vanish, went viral. He became a folk hero overnight. Online communities dubbed him the damn grandpa. Memes showed Karen screaming into walkie-talkies while Jack calmly flipped the damn switch. Within a week, the resort filed for temporary closure. Refunds drained their accounts. Staff were furloughed. Tourism dried up literally, and Karen, her board turned on her. 3 members resigned. One went on local TV and apologized publicly for ever trusting her. But Karen wasn't finished. She launched an emergency HOA meeting, accused Jack of environmental terrorism, and tried to push an emergency injunction through the county. It didn't work. The judge reviewed the water rights in 30 minutes and dismissed the request outright. "The man owns the dam, ma'am. You built a resort on borrowed water. That's not his fault." Karen's voice cracked as she screamed at the courtroom. "He's ruining this community." But the judge replied simply, "No, you ruined his."